So, for our first chapter, we're going to talk about the foundations of public speaking. So, to begin, why is it important to study public speaking? I know over the years that I've taught this course, I've heard from so many people, this is my last class to finish my associates or my degree. I've been putting it off to the very end because I am fearful of public speaking and I don't want to do it. And I understand that, and that is the way that many people believe. But one thing you do need to understand is that being able to be an effective public speaker or even communicator in any part of your life is going to be of great benefit to any of you. The first thing is that it will help you achieve your goals. You think about you want to get a job, you apply for a job, and you're called in for an interview. The key to an effective interview is being an effective communicator, being able to be confident, appear confident, sometimes even when you're nervous, being able to eloquently explain to the person interviewing you your strengths, your abilities, your education, your background, your experience, being able to communicate with someone and kind of bond with someone in that kind of environment, and that all comes down to effective communication. The second is it gives you an edge. What we do know is that most people have a fear of communication. There was an old joke that says most individuals would rather be in the coffin than being the person giving a eulogy at a funeral. So that fear is very widespread. So if you are someone in your job that is comfortable communicating and giving speeches, it's going to put you above others because that's a skill that comes in a lot. There's a lot of trainings, there's a lot of presentations that most careers do need people to do. I can tell you in my experience in education, being the person that's comfortable giving speeches has given me a lot of opportunities in order to communicate with others. I've done a lot of trainings, I've done a lot of in-services and all kinds of things like that because it is something I'm comfortable with. Effective communication and public speaking helps you display confidence. That doesn't mean you don't have nerves. Everyone will have nerves, but it does help you be able to communicate yourself in a confident manner where the person you're talking to can look at you and think, well, I think this person knows what they're talking about. It also helps you express conviction. I don't know if any of you ever had this happen, but when someone says something that you disagree with, you get upset, you maybe lose your temper, you lose your cool a little bit, and you really don't ever get out exactly what you're thinking. You kind of lose it. But then you walk away, you calm down, and then all of these great points come to your mind, and you think, oh, I wish I'd have said that, or I wish I'd have said this. That is part of being an effective communicator. When you are an effective communicator, you have the ability that in those heated moments, in those high pressure situations, you know how to take a deep breath, take a step back, calm yourself down, and communicate yourself effectively in those situations. And you have fewer of those times that you think, well, why didn't I think of this then? So that's part of effective communication. Do realize that in employment, leaders are needed. Leaders that are capable of informing others, of being organized, and holding listeners' attention. That communication is one of the top skills that helps graduates land a job. So what's the difference between public speaking and conversations? Public speaking is planned. When you're giving a speech, you practice, you plan it out, you prepare. It takes a lot more practice and planning than a conversation. With public speaking, you use fewer slang expressions, you use less casual terms, and your nonverbal communication is more formal, and your gestures are more planned. So for most of us, when we talk and we're having a conversation with our friends, sometimes our hands kind of go all over and we're very animated. But when we give a professional public speech, we need to have everything planned and poised because you don't want your gestures to detract from your point of your presentation. So nonverbal is a little bit different. As we continue In a public speech, the role of the audience is less. It's less interactive than in a conversation, so you have fewer interruptions. Next, let's discuss the communication process. The first thing to look there is the word process. When we think of that word, you need to understand that process means that there's more than one step. If you miss a step in the process, things don't turn out the way they're supposed to. When we communicate, we usually don't think about that. Usually we deliver our message and we assume that whatever we said was received by the recipient or the receiver. And that doesn't always happen. Communication fails on a regular basis. And we, as the sender of messages, sometimes don't take responsibility for that, and we don't follow through to make sure that communication is successful. So remember that communication is a process, meaning that involves more than one step. So with each communication interaction, there is a sender and a receiver. The sender is the individual that sends the message. Clearly, they're the ones that sends the information, and the receiver is the one that receives the message. Now, every time we send a message, we do something called encoding. And you don't think about doing this. This isn't something that I think we usually consciously do, but we do this, is we determine how are we going to word or phrase the message that we're sending. How are we going to phrase it? So the times you might consider this is if a child asks you a question that might be kind of difficult to answer. And you know the answer you would give to an adult, but you're talking to a child, and so you have to stop and you have to think about the words you use, and you have to think about the way that you use those words. So you encode that message. So each time we send a message, we determine the best way to word or phrase the message so that it is most easily understood. Now, every time you receive a message, you decode it. Each time we receive a message, we determine what we think that the message means in our head. So you get a message and you think and you kind of take it apart in your mind to determine what you believe that that message means. So if we choose, as the sender, the wrong wording of a message, then the receiver may not understand the message that we meant to send. And so communication then fails. Now, keep in mind that the message is the information being sent. Now, every time we send a message, we choose a channel. The channel is the space in which communication is sent, information is sent. So we have the choices of a variety of channels. We can talk to someone face-to-face. We can call someone and talk to them on the phone. We can send a text message. We can send an email. We have these options. But every time you choose the channel, you want to make sure it's appropriate. You know, I've learned that when you text or when you email someone, sometimes when you think you're being funny and sarcastic, they only think it's funny or sarcastic if they read it exactly the way you intended. But that's not what happens. So sometimes our sense of humor does not translate as well in an email or a text message versus on the phone or face-to-face. We want to make sure that we choose the correct channel for the message to be sent. If the message is really complex, you know, I don't know if you've ever done this, but I catch myself texting and it becomes longer and longer and longer, and I think, you know, I just need to call them. This is too difficult. Or you send an email and you read it and you think, well, this is not being communicated the way I intended. I just need to go down to their office. So think about what you're sending, the way you're sending it, and choose the correct channel for each message. So the content of the message should dictate the channel. We don't just text anything. We kind of consider who we're talking to and what we're saying when we determine the channel that we choose. Now, every time we communicate, noise is something that happens. This is sometimes what gets communication in trouble. Noise is anything that interferes with communication. And there are two types of noise. There's internal and external. Now, internal noise, think about when you're in an in-person class, a face-to-face classroom, and you're sitting there and the teacher's talking. Think about all the things that are going on in your mind. This is anything within you that interferes with communication. So sometimes you're sick, you're stressed, you're hungry, and that's what you're focused on. You're not thinking about what you should be thinking about then and there. Um, Other times this happens or interferes is you're in a conversation with someone and they say something that makes you think of something you want to tell them. So instead of really listening to them, you're thinking about, okay, as soon as they stop, I got to remember to say this. And so that's internal noise. It interferes with communication. Think about the amount that you do this, and you can assume that the people you're communicating with does it the same amount, if not more. So this is a way that communication can definitely fail. Now, external noise is anything outside of you that interferes with communication. So this, I think, most of us have learned to zone out a little bit better than we have the internal. But this sometimes is a problem. I mean, some of you may be right now at home and you're trying to listen to the lecture, and maybe you have kids and they're really loud in the next room and that's distracting you. Or if you're like me, you've got dogs and they're loud and barking and that's distracting you. So it's anything kind of outside of you or around you that distracts you. But like I said, I think a lot of times we're better at ignoring the external than we are the internal, because I think sometimes we don't realize how much the internal noise distracts us from communication. So with communication, there's feedback. Feedback is essential for the success of the communication process, okay? And this is what I miss about face-to-face classes. As I would give a lesson or a lecture in a face-to-face class, I could look on the faces of my class and know if they understand it or not. Are they bored? Or are they interested in the class? Do I need to come up with a funny story to get them back with me? Or is everybody doing good? So I do miss that face-to-face. But feedback is essential in the communication process. It is an observable response to a message, and it's either verbal or nonverbal. Keep in mind that many times we get ourselves in trouble because we're giving feedback we don't realize. We roll our eyes nonverbally, and we don't really catch ourselves. We don't even realize we're doing it. We kind of make those facial expressions that we don't realize, but it's definitely feedback. So there are 3 functions of feedback. The first function is assurance. Assurance basically is when you confirm that the message was received. So someone says, "Do you understand me?" and you nod your head just to confirm message received. Adjustment is what we do a lot in the decoding part of communication. So sometimes someone may send you a message. You're not sure if you understood it the way they intended, so you rephrase the message and you confirm that you understood it. Are you saying, "Is this what you want me to do? Is this what you meant?" Yes, that's right. Okay. So you adjust the message to confirm that you have the same meaning. Insight is adding more detail and perspective to the message to take it a step deeper or further. So you've listened to a lecture and you've heard me talk about noise, and then you said, "Well, I find that I really struggle with blocking out internal noise at church, and this is what I do." And so, you might take it even further. So we have to make sure that we give effective feedback, and that as a communicator, you're watching for that feedback, especially that nonverbal, because your audience tells you a lot with nonverbal communication. Remember these things about communication. Communication is a transaction. We are constantly sending and receiving messages at the same time. Like I said with feedback, nonverbal, sometimes we get ourselves in trouble. Sometimes even unintentionally, we are sending messages. So it's a transaction and it's constantly going back and forth. Communication is unavoidable. In our effort to ignore someone, we are clearly sending them a message. I used to be a middle school counselor, and I would have, a lot of girl issues would come down, and sometimes girls would come down and say, "Well, so-and-so's being mean to me." And I would talk to the other girl, "I'm not being mean to her. I'm not speaking to her." Well, that's sending a very clear message. When you ignore someone, you're sending a message. So communication is unavoidable. Communication is unrepeatable. Have you ever told a funny story or a joke and you told it once and it was a hit and people laughed, and you tried it again and people stared at you and crickets chirped? This happens a lot. It happens as a teacher too. I'll give a lesson and it lasts a long time. There's a lot of feedback. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of laughter. And I might give the same lecture the next night and I just get stares and there's no interaction. So we never communicate the same. It's unrepeatable. And communication is irreversible. We can't take it back. Even by saying I was just kidding or I didn't mean it. It's irreversible. Once you've said something, it's there. So, the history of public speaking, real briefly, we'll go over this. It's important to understand that the ability to be a public speaker was once cherished as only something that the wealthy elite population was allowed to do. When you think about kids now and they take piano lessons or ballet lessons or gymnastics, in the 4th century BC, rhetoric lessons were what the elite population did. And only your wealthy white males were allowed to take these rhetoric lessons. Now, rhetoric is the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially the use of figures of speech and the compositional techniques. So, rhetoric is considered the artistic part of public speaking. It was considered an art form, the art of the orator. So your young, wealthy white males were given oratory lessons. It was an exclusive thing for the elite. The government, so you think about, why was it only elite? The government was composed of wealthy white males. So they wanted like-minded individuals to be taught how to express themselves because more than likely they would believe the same and then take the same political spots in government. A philosopher named Corax changed this a little bit. He felt that in order to live in a just society, all citizens needed to know how to communicate effectively. The government was taking land from farmers, and the government would say, well, come defend yourself in court if you want your land back, knowing that they wouldn't be capable. And Corax trained the ordinary people how to communicate effectively. 2 other philosophers had important views on rhetoric. Plato believed that truth could only be found through dialogue. I don't have the truth and you don't have the truth, but through discourse, we could find the truth. Aristotle was a little more leery. He felt that when one was skilled in rhetoric, they could be deceitful more easily, and he was concerned about how people would use their power of persuasion. Now, going on through time, think about our country. Freedom of speech has been a key part of our country's development, and effective public speaking has been a huge part of this from our politicians and their success or failure. World War II changed viewpoints of public speaking. If you've ever seen the videos of Hitler, and he was communicating to a large audience, and they were enamored by his words and his passion, Hitler's ability to persuade in his speeches made the academic world concerned about training other people the art of public speaking. They questioned whether or not they really wanted to teach this skill, or would that skill just evolve into more individuals like Hitler. So public speaking was removed from curriculum soon after World War II, but reinstated during the 60s. So you think about what was going on in the 60s. We have the Civil Rights Movement. Later on, we have the Vietnam War protest movement. So how did academia and the government want young people to communicate their beliefs? There were violent protests and there were civil protests, and the civil protests were led by words. They wanted young people to learn how to verbally speak their oppositions rather than violently. And so public speaking was brought back. It's been a key part of rights throughout our country. You go to women's suffrage, to the civil rights movement. You think about all of our great civil rights leaders and their passion through communication is kind of how that's evolved. You think about right now, we have political debates going on with the presidential elections coming up, and when people watch those, they're watching each candidate's ability to communicate. Do they look like they're under pressure? Do they look like they're telling the truth? Do they look genuine? Do they look honest? All of those things are a key part of being a political leader in our country now. And so being able to be an effective public speaker will take you far in your personal life and your career. Being able to communicate is one of the most important tools that we have, and I hope throughout this course you can pick up some things here and there that do help you develop those skills. So I've enjoyed talking with you today, and that is all. Thank you.